Hello, everyone. This is Haley Hansen. I'm the leader of Husch Blackwell's Higher Education Group. We are excited to give today's presentation on timely warnings and emergency notifications under the Clery Act. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a couple of housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple icons for your use during today's program. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit your questions via the question box, and Ben and I will try to answer your questions at the end of the webinar. If a fuller answer is needed or we run out of time, which has happened before, we will make sure that we respond to you with an email after the webinar. We do truly appreciate audience participation and encourage you to submit questions that you have. If you have any technical difficulties, please click on the help icon. It has a question mark and will provide some common technical issues for today's webinar. A copy of today's slide deck and a sample timely warning policy is available for you in the resource list under the resource list icon. It looks like a folder at the bottom of your screen. This program has been approved for continuing legal education credit in Colorado, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, Tennessee, Texas, and Wisconsin. To report your hours in Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Nebraska, Tennessee, or Texas, please click on the CLE icon at the bottom of your screen and complete the questions. A recording of this webinar will be available to you tomorrow for viewing and sharing within your campus community. Once the link is available, you will also be provided a certificate of attendance. The recording will be available to you for 2 weeks. Joining me today is Ben Irwin. Ben is an attorney within our higher education group and really focuses his practice on Title IX and Clery. Ben analyzes, revises, and drafts annual security reports required under the Clery Act. He reviews campus safety records and helps institutions determine what incidents should be included. He also conducts proactive audits to spot potential issues and offer solutions to help avoid the most common non-compliance issues that we see with Clery. So, Ben, welcome, and we're excited to hear what you have to tell our audience today as well.
Thanks, Haley.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. First of all, again, I'm Haley Hansen and Ben Irwin. Our agenda today, we're going to do a very quick Clery overview because we want to spend the bulk of today's presentation really digging into timely warnings and emergency notifications. And our hope is to go over not only the technical requirements, to kind of look at some of the timely warnings to compare and contrast, but also talk about enforcement and really practical suggestions that you can take away from today's webinar. And then finally, it's that time of year again, so we would be remiss if we did any type of Clery webinar without some ASR reminders. So let's go ahead and get started and just do our quick overview on the Clery Act. And we're really assuming that the majority of our audience is very familiar with Clery and the responsibilities of Clery, so we're going to go over this fairly quickly. First, Janine Clery. Obviously, this is a picture of Janine Clery. She was raped and murdered in her dorm room at Lehigh University in 1986, and her parents went on a campaign that has later resulted in what we now know as the Clery Act. So let's talk about that. The Clery Act has always had bipartisan support and has been supported by each president as we've changed administrations since 1990. There's been multiple amendments to the original Campus Crime and Security Act of 1990, and again, the law changed to actually be named the Janine Clery Disclosure of Campus Security Policy and Campus Crime Statistics Act. And then the last really big change we saw to Clery was the Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA, which went into effect as well. So those are the laws that we are really focusing on when we talk about Clery. And as you know, you have these responsibilities to collect and classify your crimes, reported crimes, that you must publish and distribute, And one of the things we're going to talk about at the end of this presentation is how many schools really struggle to appropriately distribute their ASR on or before October 1st of each year, to provide the crime statistics via the ED online survey, and then to issue timely warnings and emergency notifications. When we've done Clery webinars in the past, we always get questions about this topic of timely warnings and emergency notifications. So again, the purpose of this was really to dive a little deeper into this area and make sure that everybody understands what their obligations are, and what we see are the most common issues of noncompliance as well. Some contingent requirements to know, just to be aware of: does your institution have a campus police or safety department? And if it does, you must have a daily crime log. And then, does your institution have on-campus housing? I know some of our listeners today do not have on-campus housing, but if you do, you must also have missing student policies and comply with your fire safety requirements as well. All right. What we've seen over since 2002 is really an increase in the amount of fines and actually the amount of Clery audits that we see in a couple of different ways that are taking place across the country. We have seen the fines go from $27,500 to today, they're at $57,317 per violation. And so if you miss one policy statement, if you over under report a crime statistic, all of those can result in a $57,317 violation. So as you can imagine, those fines tend to add up quickly. And as you will see, over the last 4 years, the fine amount is going up each year. And so we're closing in on $60,000 per violation fairly quickly. And so each year it is within the regulations that it annually gets adjusted and the fine.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, it's going to continue to go up by $1,000 to $2,000 a year based on that automatic mechanism that is now in place. So every January, February, you're going to see kind of an uptick in that number.
And again, before that, we'd really seen things that would stay for years. It was at $35,000 for several years in a row. So there's a clear direction from the Department of Education, from Secretary DeVos, that Clery is a focus of this administration. So what do we think is coming? There are two bills that have been reintroduced, and we've given you those two bills. The Campus Safety and Accountability Act has been introduced for multiple years now, and has not gotten a lot of traction in Congress, but they continue to reintroduce it. And the potential Clery fines under the Act are $150,000 per violation. So it's always one to keep an eye on, although what we're hearing is there's, again, not a lot of traction this year as well. And then the Ravi Akerdeen Safe Student Study Abroad Act, and this was reintroduced as well this year. And really, I think this is important because this would actually change Clery to say that you must disclose crime statistics for all study abroad programs, regardless of whether or not there's ownership or control in the building or property at that location. And so this is something that would change how we're currently reporting Clery incidents, or whether or not we have non-campus property or a separate campus when it comes to our study abroad programs for our institutions, because it all turns on whether or not there's that control over the property in which the students are staying at. And one important point on this is that it could really be contrary to what we're seeing with the proposed regulations under Title IX. The proposed regulations under Title IX actually state that that institutions' obligations regarding their Title IX policies would be limited in their jurisdiction to within the United States. And there were a lot of comments under the proposed regs for Title IX as to, are there obligations for study abroad programs because of this jurisdiction restriction. And so, and again, there's still an obligation under Clery to report if you do have control as a non-campus, if it's non-campus property or if it's a separate campus. So when the final regulations are put forth, we're thinking sometime this fall, it'll be interesting to see if the department responds to this issue, because it seems very contradictory as it sits right now.
Yeah, and if I was a betting man, I wouldn't think that. My guess is that this Study Abroad Act probably won't pass in its current form. But if it were, it would be very interesting to see how the Department of Education would define the limits of reporting crimes in that context, when the current language of the proposed bill says that it's outside. It doesn't matter if you control or own it. So what? Just anything in the whole city or country that's reported? I don't know. It's just an interesting thought as to how broad that crime reporting feature could be of that bill if it got passed. So we'll see.
Well, and I think it creates another challenge as you're trying to get the crime statistics from law enforcement as to where your students are traveling, because we have seen repeatedly that there's not foreign law enforcement agencies are not quick to respond to requests from institutions as to what their crime statistics are.
Yep.
And if you are lucky enough to get a response, it's certainly not going to at times give the information that.
Yeah, I was talking to a school about this exact thing recently, and they said that they actually did, from a South American country, I think it was Colombia or Peru. They got all the crime statistics from the whole country for the last 3 years, just like tons and tons and tons of information in response to their kind of Clery formal request for crime stats. So that was kind of humorous to me.
So the new legislation, again, whether or not there would be any traction, I don't, if I was, again, I agree with Ben. If we had to read the tea leaves, I would say neither of these will likely pass this legislative session, that it's not likely to see this. But it's helpful to kind of gauge what our legislators are thinking about Clery, and again, increasing Clery and Clery compliance from both the legislative branch and then also from the Department of Education, and as we look at enforcement. So something to be aware of. All right, so let's move into campus alerts, and we're going to start with timely warnings, and we want to start with a poll question. So it's late on Friday night. A student calls campus security and indicates that about 20 minutes ago she was sexually assaulted by an unknown male at a party at a fraternity house. The fraternity house is officially recognized by the institution. The fraternity owns the house. The fraternity actually owns the house where the alleged incident occurred, and the house is right on the edge of campus. Is the institution required by law to issue a timely warning for this situation? So if you would respond yes, no, or more information is needed, the wonderful, usually a lawyer answer to that is we would always like more information, right?
Yeah, of course.
Most situations. So we'll give you just a couple seconds here and have you respond to this question. All right, so it looks like we've got about half that are participating, and 62% of you say yes. So, again, as attorneys on the phone would probably choose more information as needed, because we'd always like more to include in the timely warning. But a timely warning, yes, you must, in a manner that is timely and withholds as confidential the names and other identifying information of the victims, put forth information to make sure that your campus is safe.
Yeah. That with that poll question a little bit, I suspect that some people may have thought more information was needed due to the incident being reported in a fraternity house, on the edge of campus, those types of things. And yes, again, as much information as possible is always helpful. But I think under the facts of that question, I think in that case we can safely say that the fraternity house was either non-campus property or more likely met one of the definitions of on-campus property. So in those situations, we would then have what is necessary to be required to issue a timely warning. Taking one step back here, just kind of generally thinking about campus alerts, timely warnings, and emergency notifications. I think in my experience working with institutions on these matters, there's a general understanding of, oh, we need to inform our students and employees when there's dangerous situations going on in our or emergency situations going on in our campus. That's understood, and there's also an understanding that there is some discretion by the letter of the law and guidance. There's discretion that institutions have when they're analyzing these situations to determine what is an emergency, what is a dangerous situation. But to be clear, like on the back end, and we're going to get into this a little bit more as we move through these slides, on the back end, when these timely warning emergency notification situations are being assessed by the Department of Education during a program review, it seems like some of that institutional discretion kind of goes away. So you absolutely have discretion. You need to use that discretion very well. But the Department of Education, they can be pretty stringent about you not issuing a timely warning when they think you should have done so. So documentation is always helpful. We'll talk about that some more in a few minutes. But specifically now about timely warnings. If we could go back just one slide there. Yeah, no problem. This what you see on the screen right now is the language from the regulation. This is the regulatory, the technical requirement, and that is that you must issue a timely warning or in a manner that is timely and that withholds confidential the names and other identifying information of victims. These warnings that will aid in the prevention of similar crimes and report about what is going on with these Clery crimes. So that's kind of the technical legal requirement. But let's look at what that means. In practice, what you have to do is you have to look, has a Clery crime been reported? And Clery crimes, there's a lot of them. You know the basics. There's murder, there's non-negligent manslaughter, rape, there's a sexual assault offenses, robbery, aggravated assault, hate crimes, disciplinary referrals and arrests, and the VAWA offenses, stalking, dating violence, and domestic violence. So has a Clery crime been reported? Step 2, has it been reported on your Clery geography? Back to that poll question earlier, that frat house, whether it was technically non-campus property or on-campus property, it was within Clery geography. So we're always trying to figure out, for purposes of technically complying with the timely warning requirement, did it occur on Clery geography? Was it reported to a CSA, to a campus security authority, or a local police agency? In these cases, if your institution has notice of the situation, if you as the security director or dean of student affairs, if you get the information about a criminal incident that might necessitate a timely warning, number 3 is going to be met. It's a pretty low barrier to being met. Basically, if just no one knew about it, then you can't issue a warning. It's kind of a common sense thing. But then number 4 is where that discretion comes into play. And for the timely warning requirement to be met, you have to consider that the institution has to consider that this situation, as it's been reported, represents a serious or continuing threat to students and employees. And there's some factors that we can pull out, and we'll get into those, but there's some factors that you can analyze that will help you with this, but really it's still a decision that you have to make on a case-by-case basis, and the answer is not always clear. But when all is said and done, there's still even if it's a close call, you still have the discretion to issue a timely warning in other situations as well. So if, let's say, 1, 3, and 4 are met, but the incident took place across the street on private property, No, there's not a technical timely warning requirement there, but it still might be a good idea to notify your students and employees, because really the spirit of the Clery Act is that we're trying to keep them safe and notify them of situations so they can take steps to keep themselves safe. So here are the step one, is it a Clery crime? So here's the list of Clery crimes that if one of these is reported, we have to think about are there other factors suggesting maybe a timely warning should be issued? And I kind of talked about those a little bit earlier. When you're thinking about Clery geography, again, most of you on this call are familiar with the Clery Act, so we don't. There's much guidance on these in the Clery handbook about what would be classified as these types of properties. There's definitions, sometimes multiple definitions for each one. But just keep in mind, if it's on your on-campus property, if it's in an on-campus student housing facility, if it's on your quote-unquote public property that's around or through your campus, or if it's a non-campus building or property that you own or control and your students are going to, then there could be a timely warning at play. And then your campus security authorities, again, I mentioned earlier, if the report comes into the campus security department, if it comes into another official at your institution with responsibility for students and campus activities, I'm thinking dean of students, athletic director, Title IX coordinator. You can kind of go down the list of this kind of broader category. The one to think about a little bit more that I think gets overlooked a little bit when we talk about campus security authorities is number 2 up there. So think about your students who are they're not residential assistants, because if they were, they might fall in number 4. But they work at the entrance of a dorm or in the wellness facility, and they kind of monitor access. They're checking IDs, those types of things coming into a building. Well, under the Clery Act, those are campus security authorities. So if they get crime reports, it's important to keep in mind that they need to know where that information should go, so that the timely warning analysis can kind of be conducted, as well as your other Clery obligations that aren't as pressing as the timely warning, such as documented in the crime log, et cetera.
And then one that we've found for CSAs as well that is frequently overlooked, or people are not training on, as all coaches. That coaches are under the handbook very clearly, whether they're assistant coaches, whether they're a volunteer coach. They're CSA, graduate assistants.
Handbook,
and so, making sure that your coaches are trained. I do a lot of training in athletics departments, and I ask that question. It's shocking to me how many coaches do not raise their hand that they are a campus security authority. So, again, making sure that you're identifying those pockets, because we've seen in the audits that are being released a lot of attention being paid to CSA training, ensuring that CSAs are making timely reports to you and that those are being included on your crime logs, and timely warnings or emergency notifications are issued if necessary. So that's another area where I think it's going to be important to look at compliance.
And then this goes back to the fourth matter on that previous slide. Does your institution consider the situation that's been reported to represent a threat to students and employees? And based on the report that is made, different threat factors that I've listed here or others could apply. A common one that we see that is flagged by the Department of Education in its program reviews reports is whether the perpetrator has been apprehended. So if there's a report of a sexual assault, if there's a report of a shooting or an attempted murder or these various crimes that are being committed, especially serious and violent ones, and the perpetrator hasn't been apprehended, that's a significant flag it should be a significant flag to you. It certainly is to the Department of Education of, oh, we need to get a timely warning out to our community. Some other factors that you see pop up, if there's kind of been multiple reports in a close period of time of date rape drugs being used, of burglaries in the dorms. Those are all kind of things that are kind of these common situations where it was determined that there was a threat, and therefore we should be notifying our campus community. So that's kind of an overview of timely warnings. Let's move next to the emergency notifications, and we'll, in a few slides, I'm going to put up a comparison. You'll see they're kind of they kind of work in the same world, emergency notifications and timely warnings, and that's why we kind of just collectively refer to them as campus alerts. But there are some differences. So first I'll quickly go through some emergency notification requirements, and then we'll compare and contrast the two. So here's the language from the regulations. Your ASR must have the procedures that you will use to immediately notify the campus community when you confirm that there's a significant emergency that threatens the health or safety of your students or employees occurring on the campus. So there's one little difference. The emergency notification requirement is limited to your campus. The technical requirement is limited to your campus property rather than the broader Clery geography under the timely warning analysis. So that baseball field across town that you have a lease on for your baseball team to play, that's in your Clery geography, and that would fall under the timely warning analysis if some kind of Clery crime was reported there. That's certainly something where a timely warning could maybe be issued. On the other hand, there's no obligation, for example, if severe weather was about to hit a non-campus property that's in a different town, and it's not going to affect your actual on-campus property. So that's just one little difference there. And so some examples from the Clery handbook as to what, again, timely warnings were focused on Clery crimes. Emergency notifications, much kind of a broader category. These come from the Clery handbook. Illnesses, forest fires, gas leaks, bomb threats, broad category, and it could potentially include Clery crimes as well. There could be a situation where a crime spree is occurring on your campus that warrants an emergency notification. So there is a little bit of crossover between the two, and we'll get to that a little bit more. Or right here we will with a full question.
Yep, I think we're ready for the next one. So here's another true or false for you. If a Clery crime occurs on your campus and presents an immediate threat to students and employees, true or false, is both a timely warning and emergency notification issued? Should they both be issued? So I think this gets at that issue that you were just talking about, Ben, so we'll see how well the audience is listening. Give you a few more.
Yeah, I guess I could talk a little bit more about a situation where that. So if there's an active shooter on campus, and you know, this is the most extreme situation here, but it has happened in the past at the various schools. So an active shooter situation, and someone is murdered. Well, that's a Clery crime on Clery geography, presumably reported to some CSA, and absolutely, it's an ongoing threat. And then in the emergency notification realm, it's a threatening situation that's immediate threat to your students and employees on campus, so it's also the emergency notification requirement. So let's look at the answers here. It looks like about 2/3 said true. We should issue both a timely warning and an emergency notification, and about 1/3 said no. The correct answer here is actually false. Even though both of them have been, we can assume the requirements have been met for both. That example I just laid out. There's others, I'm sure. the regulations make clear that when you follow your emergency notification procedure, you don't have to issue a timely warning as well. So this, just using the same example, this active shooter situation, an emergency notification goes out to your campus community, even though we just went down the list, and yes, it also meets the timely warning requirement. You don't have to separately issue a timely warning. You don't have to go through your protocols for that as well, because you've already done, you've already got the message out. You've already kind of accomplished the spirit, and in this case also the letter of the law by issuing the emergency notification. So here's the screen I mentioned earlier, where kind of comparing and contrasting the two types of campus alerts we're discussing here. The scope, first of all, with timely warnings, if there's a Clery crime, that's where we're really thinking about timely warnings. Emergency notifications, the broader category. When we're going to think about issuing them, that's when we have information of a Clery crime on Clery geography that's been reported and represents an ongoing threat to the safety and suits of employees. In the emergency notification realm, you get the information, and then there's got to be some type, even if it's just a few seconds, there's some level of confirming that the information that's been received is a significant emergency. I guess you maybe just don't take the word of whoever comes in the door if you don't know them that there's a significant weather event coming. You first go over and you check you check online to make sure that that's true, and or if there's a gas leak or someone comes to the security or facilities department, and I think there might be a gas leak in the dorms. There would be some confirmation process, but once that's been confirmed, then at that point we're sending out an emergency notification. The geographic scope, again, just the Clery geography for timely warnings, all of the Clery geography for timely warnings, but just the campus for emergency notifications. We put a few examples in there that you can take a look at of when the Department of Education has kind of indicated that it would be appropriate to use an emergency notification or a timely warning. This is important as well. When you're issuing a timely warning, you're required to send it to all your students and employees. So it wouldn't be limited to, oh, this happened after hours in the gymnasium, and so we're going to limit it to athletes and just the athletics folks. That's not the correct way to handle a timely warning. However, in the emergency notification sense, that gas leak in the dorms I was talking about, maybe that would be a little bit more limited of a situation. Maybe you don't have to notify your commuter students or your temporary employee, those types of things. You can be more limiting with your emergency notifications if you can correctly identify and a segment of your population to where that notification can go and they can protect themselves. And then really in both cases we are trying to get people to take action to protect them, notify them of a situation, and ensure that they can take action to protect themselves. So now we're going to look at some practical suggestions related to campus alerts, and pretty much everything that we discuss from this slide through the next 10-15 slides before we get back to the ASR reminders. Everything here is premised on information that we've reviewed and information we've kind of pulled from various program review reports and fine action letters that the Department of Education has issued to institutions, which are in most cases very available online if you ever want to take a look and read some pretty lengthy reports about Clery Act enforcement, which is probably not that interesting. But what we're going to talk about here, these suggestions, we can see how the department thinks about campus alerts and when and why and under what circumstances they should be issued. Before we get right into the suggestions, though, a few enforcement principles that we see as we're looking through these reports and from the department. While we've just covered the technical legal requirements, you really need to be sure to follow your policy when it comes to timely warnings and emergency notifications. If your policy perfectly aligns with the with legal requirements, then there's no issue there. But we've seen many circumstances where the language of a policy may be broader than it's just we're going to issue alerts in these situations, even though maybe it wouldn't technically be required. Well, the Department of Education, they hold you to your policy. If you say that we will issue a timely warning to students if there is to students and employees if there's a serious criminal offense that occurs in the town where the campus is located, even if it's not on your Clery geography, if your policy says that and you don't follow through on that, and there's a situation where you should have followed your policy, that is a potential finding in the Department of Education's mind. On the other, kind of that same balancing act that we talked about earlier, we're always worried about, of course you want to follow your policy, I just said, but you have discretion to, even if your policy doesn't necessarily say that you're going to issue them in other circumstances, you still have some discretion if there is a situation that doesn't meet the technical requirements of the law, and you just want to protect your students and employees. It's close enough to your campus. It's close enough to being on your Clery geography that you want to get it out there. It's still okay that you do that. But always keep in mind, just be thinking about the concept of oversaturation. If you're sending an alert, a high intensity alert 3 times a week, and they're about parking fines and things like that, you're going to dilute the message when there's an actual an active shooter, a violent robbery that occurs. You're going to dilute that message when you're trying to really get something out where someone needs to take immediate action. So just keep that in mind.
And Ben, I would add that, as we've seen some of these enforcements with the Department of Education doing audits, they want to understand that you understand the difference between a timely warning, an emergency notification, and that you've kept those separated. And I know you're going to talk about some practical tips, but sending out about parking issues as a timely warning is a problem.
Yeah.
Because that's not a timely warning. That's not.
It dilutes the message.
Again, it dilutes the message, and the department will say, "Do you really understand what a timely warning is?" Because you're sending every alert and you're welcome to alert your campus on things you think they need to know about, but you're sending every alert as if it's a timely warning.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point there. And then the second point up there, we see this as a common thing, is you're expected to act reasonably based on what you know. If you get information that indicates a timely warning should be sent, you should send it. But on the other hand, you're not. If there's some kind of wiggle room in the facts, and you just decide, well, this might have been a targeted domestic violence situation. So we don't think there's an ongoing threat when the facts suggest, okay, maybe that is the case, but also the perpetrator hasn't been apprehended and there's the weapon hasn't been found and all these other things. Well, maybe those other things outweigh that it might possibly have been targeted domestic violence and then other people at risk. So while you need to act reasonably based on what you know, but don't just always interpret the facts in a way that makes it so that you're like, oh, well, that could have happened that way, so yeah, probably not a timely warning here. That's not a good idea either. And then you're expected to make decisions on a case-by-case basis. It's not every time a robbery is reported, a timely warning is issued. That's not how this is supposed to work. It's supposed to be like, oh, we've got a robbery. We know that's a Clery crime. Where did it occur? Has the guy been caught? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, timely warning. So think through the issues on a case-by-case basis. Now let's get into these practical suggestions. And this is based, again, we pulled this kind of these themes out of the Department of Education's program review reports, their fine letters to kind of come up with these. And also in our own practice, we see these as potential ways that you can improve your processes related to these campus alerts on campus. So the first step, educate your students and employees about campus alerts. This is not required by the Clery Act in any way. Are you required to provide this type of training? However, if you're doing back-to-school training anyways, why not a slide or two on what timely warnings are, what students and employees can expect, why you are sending, why they're getting that text message, why they're getting that email, what other methods you use, and when they get them, why you're sending them and what they need to be thinking about. So educating them so that they have context when they see that warning text message that comes in notifying them of a crime, so that it's just not, oh, this is happening, oh my goodness, but they can maybe fall back on the little bit of training that you've been provided so that they know, okay, we only get these when something very serious is happening, so we need to read it, we need to take action, we need to keep checking our phone to see if we're getting updates. It's a good way to inform them about what's going on. Practical suggestion number 2, train your CSAs and clarify communication channels. Not just in the area of campus alerts, but more generally, it's very important that campus security authorities know what their obligations are under the law. Not only do you have your crime statistic reporting obligations that you really lean on CSAs to give you information, but then there's these campus alert situations as well. So it's really useful. It's really useful to train them up and give them the tools that they need to know when I get information about this type of thing, this is where I need to go. I don't have to investigate the situation. I don't have to, there's really nothing more for me to do at that time. I just need to get immediately, as quickly as possible, get the information to the director of security, the dean of, wherever your school, wherever it works for your school, where that information needs to go so that it can be processed and one of these alerts can be sent out if necessary. And you might do this not just through formal employee training, and employees are trained a lot on a lot of things, but email with a kind of a little chart that explains to them, you're a CSA, or remind them that they are CSAs. A lot of people don't even know. Remind them that they're CSAs. Tell them what that means. Tell them what the Clery crimes are. Tell them where to go if they get information about one of those crimes, or really anything that seems suspicious or off or criminal in nature. Let them know where they need to go.
I think, Ben, too, when we've seen CSA policies being created in institutions, they've also talked about not only where to report, but what to report. What is common that we want to see in a CSA report. And another thing to think about is, if a CSA doesn't report and we find out later after the fact that they haven't reported something or they failed in their obligation, is there a consequence for that as well? And so that's another thing you can think about if you're going to put together training or a policy on your campus, to really make sure it's as clear as possible of what their obligations are and what those consequences could be if they fail to meet if a RA fails to report. They may not be able to be eligible to be an RA again after that, because you want to make sure that they are making those reports, because obviously your Clery compliance hinges on the fact that all these CSAs are completing their responsibilities.
Yeah, and there's a good example of this in one of the program review reports I was reading as I was preparing for this, and the department cited the institution for not training their CSAs, but it wasn't specifically because they didn't train their CSAs. It was because the CSAs or the CSAs in this particular case were kind of the heads of the residence directors, and through their processes at this school, the residence directors also had a role in getting timely warnings out, and the residence directors clearly had not been informed how to do that. So they were not giving good information or really any information to to the people in the residence halls about, they weren't really getting the warning that they should have been getting, but it was because these CSAs weren't given information. They weren't given the tools to succeed. So that's a practical suggestion. Make sure you're giving them the tools that they need to do what they need to do. The next one, designate appropriate decision makers. With this one, this is kind of an obvious one. You need to have, when push comes to shove, people need to know you're within your administration who is ultimately deciding. It may be a team that's deciding, but who is responsible for making the decision on whether an emergency notification or a timely warning is being issued. That needs to be given to someone, and it needs to be clear to that person or team that is their obligation to do so. Tied to that, and these are kind of all tied together in a way, but tied to that is to have processes in place to facilitate prompt and accurate decision making. Now, as we've noted before, the department evaluates an institution's policies and procedures against the explicit requirements of the Clery Act, but it also does that. It also does it based on the decisions that are being made. So ensuring that your policies are written in a way that facilitate, okay, if these timely warnings requirements are met, and we've analyzed the threat factors and everything's met here, okay, that's the decision that's been made, and we're going to now get this out ASAP. In one way, and this kind of goes back to the last continuation of the last one a little bit about facilitating prompt and accurate decision making. You might think about, to the extent you haven't yet, having some type of worksheet that the decider has access to, where something comes in, information is received by this person or group, and they can go through that threat analysis and, oh, okay, I know that the perpetrator hasn't been apprehended yet. I know that there was a weapon that hasn't been found. I know that this is the third report of this nature in the past few weeks. I know this. Check. Yeah, we got to send it here. So maybe a worksheet of some sort to help your institution and your decision makers make the correct decision and get something out when they need to. And then, of course, you need to empower your decision makers. And here, what we've seen from the Department of Education is they don't like excuses that things were delayed because a decision maker wasn't available at the moment. So maybe a one-person decision maker is not the best case. You at least have to have a designee or a backup in case the main decision maker isn't available. Or, you probably don't, some smaller schools maybe, but for the most part, just if you have to wait for the president to sign off on every timely warning that goes out, well, that may lead to a delayed timeliness issue, and in which case you open yourself up to liability if you're not getting the message out quick enough. So you want your decision makers to be able to, your final decision makers to actually be able to get the process of issuing the notification out without some type of delay based on unavailability at meetings, vacations. Go down the list of reasons why people might not be available who are on the team or who normally would be making the decision. In one case that I was looking at, the Department of Education, just they cited a school that the security audit, it wasn't a formal security department with police officers at this school, but they had a security officer as responsible for. But their procedures said that timely warnings are always going to be put out by the public relations manager, and so the functioning security office, they were of the sense that a timely warning should go out, but this came in over the weekend, and the public relations manager was not there to issue the timely warning. So they just waited kind of until early the next week to do it, and that didn't fly with the department. So be thinking about situations like these late night incidents, these weekend incidents, and how this process can still play out, even though it may not be exactly what was intended. What are your safeguards in place for the unique situations? Facilitate swift and effective execution. Another, again, getting at making sure that your people are empowered to get the message out. With this, you may want to have, this is just something that I've thought about, in some schools I know utilize, you may want to, in advance, think about, what are some timely warning emergency notification situations that are seen with some regularity at our institution, and what can we reasonably foresee, whether it be a weather event, or so what can we reasonably foresee as possibly requiring one in the future? You're not going to cover everything, but just what are the things that we might see there? Well, you might think about creating some template notifications, so you have kind of language in the can ready to go, that you can use rather than trying to recreate the wheel every time. That takes us to, our last poll question.
Our last poll question. An institution typically only uses a text messaging system to issue campus alerts. The institution gives students and employees an opportunity to register their phone numbers at the beginning of each term, and includes in its ASR a description of how to register. True or false, this approach to issuing campus alerts is consistent with guidance in the Clery handbook. So we'll give you just a few seconds as we're shortly running out of time.
I'll get through these last suggestions a little quicker.
All right, just in the interest of time, we'll kind of show right now we're at 73% false and the rest true. So what do you think about this then?
So here we kind of look to the Clery handbook for guidance, and you're not required to use a particular mode of communication, and there's an encouragement to use overlapping means of communication. So what we're really thinking about here, though, is the guidance that says you cannot rely solely on text messaging system if all members of the campus community are not required to participate in that system. The fact pattern we just kind of discussed in the poll question, everyone wasn't required to. They were notified of it and encouraged to and told how to register, but they weren't required to do so, in which case there needs to be other methods to making sure that you get the message out to your whole campus community. Email's another common one. There may be apps available, but just keep that in mind. You need to use method or methods to make sure that you're getting the message out to, in timely warning case, to all your students and employees, emergency notification to the population, the full campus or the segment of the population that you're trying to get to. So that's the practical suggestion here. Make sure that you are preparing multiple means of communication, and then you are thinking about how you're going to use them and how you're going to get the message out to everybody. Suggestion 8, make sure you're providing sufficient information. It sounds so easy, but it's really not, and the department has cited many schools for this. At minimum, we're thinking about the location, the time, the type of crime, assuming you know that information. But just if you're issuing campus alerts that are very vague, that don't get the message across, your students and employees, they may look at it and just dismiss it, oh, what's this even mean? No, we're trying to inform them of what is going on so they can protect themselves. So here's what I believe is a sufficient example of a timely warning. You've given the type of crime, where it occurred, what time it occurred, some information that is known about the perpetrator, and information that, hey, this is still an active situation, and be alert. So it's sufficiently clear. There's information, but it's not too long either, not too short. It just kind of gets to the facts, and it informs them, take cover, be alert if you're in this area, because here's what's going on. Document your process. And this goes back to kind of the worksheets and other things we've mentioned. If the Department of Education comes in and they look and they see that, oh, you had these reported sexual assaults, you've had these robberies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, we don't see any timely warnings that accompany these. Can you explain that to us? And if you don't have documentation showing why you didn't do it, that could be problematic for you. So documenting situations, of course, when you issue one, there'll be documentation because you issued one, but having some of that analysis on paper is useful as well. And then on the other hand, in situations where you don't issue one, where maybe you could have, the more documentation, the better, if you're under review. And then, of course, review the big picture. We covered a lot of things today. Remember, you're trying to keep your students and employees safe, and you're also trying to meet, kind of secondary to that, you're trying to comply with legal requirements as well. So look at the big picture. What are we doing now? What can we do better? And how can we just take the steps necessary to improve these processes? That's something that we suggest you doing in this area.
All right, so here are some reminders. Obviously, October 1st is quickly approaching. I know it's July, but it will be here before we know it with all the back-to-school activities. So here's some of the reminders. Number one, making sure that you're appropriately distributing your ASR. And to all students, employees, prospective students and employees, which we'll talk about a little bit more as well, must have crime statistics for the past 3 years and current policy statements. So if you're making changes to your policies this summer, it must be current. You must let your director of security or campus safety or UPD know that you've made updates to your Title IX or sexual misconduct policies or other drug and alcohol policies. So make sure that those are accurate and included as you're distributing your ASR. And also remember, again, if you're going to distribute via email, which most of our clients do with a link, and have to have the direct URL link. It can't be 2 links to get to the report, and you must do a summary of the report. So many people just say, here's our annual security report. That is not sufficient. You will get fined for that. That is not a sufficient distribution of the report. We just like to remind people of the Drug-Free Schools and Communities Act compliance. 90% or more of all of the audits that have been completed by the Clery audit team have included issues regarding this. Number one, issues that there haven't been appropriate notification to students, and number 2, that they don't have access to their biennial reviews. So every 2 years you must review your drug and alcohol policies, processes. Materials can be cross-referenced, but again, this will be checked during a Title IV program review and a Clery audit. So it's something you want to be very aware of, and you're working with your student affairs group to make sure that you're in compliance with the Drug-Free Schools and Communities Act. Again, publication. Some people decide that they want to put their report into a single document. And then if you have multiple campuses and you decide to publish within a single document, just remember you have to meet separately all of the requirements for separate campuses. So you've got to make sure that it's clear how you're meeting all the Clery requirements in this one publication for multiple campuses.
Still something I see that's very common is trying to stuff 10 campuses into a single report and just focusing on the main campus and failure to differentiate all those policies between campuses. And I mean, understandably, it can be messy because at that point it's a 100-page, 150-page document, and it's hard to comply when you do it that way. So just be cautious if you are.
Yeah, be careful. Make sure, again, you're independently for each campus complying. And then we would just remind you of non-campus versus separate campus, and how many schools we've seen that actually do qualify as having separate campuses, that they own or control the site. It's not reasonably contiguous to the main campus. There's an organized program of study, meaning that you offer courses and educational programs that lead to a degree, certificate, or credential. That's a pretty broad statement in terms of, of a separate campus, and that there's one administrator. It doesn't have to be a high-level administrator. It doesn't have to be a full-time administrator. So a lot of things meet the administrator requirements as well, and put that campus into a separate campus. And so we see that as something that's schools have been fined, and it's a common mistake. It's an all too common mistake as you're looking at your geography. And then, again, making sure that as I talked about earlier, that you're providing that publication, that you're describing the information in the ASR, the exact URL. All of that is available in the statement that the school will provide a paper copy upon request. It must be distributed, as I stated earlier, to prospective students and employees. Prospective employees means anybody who you're interviewing must be getting a copy or getting notification of your ASR. It doesn't have to be included in job postings or advertisements, but it's important that marketing materials or your website contain information regarding this as well. So this is something, again, that we've seen a lot of focus. If you get into an audit, they will ask you for samples of where it is on websites and notifying prospective students and employees. So be careful of that as well. And again, make sure you're completing the online survey. So we've run out of time, but I do want to let you know that we do have a demo talking about Clery compliance and our Clery compliance tool set that Ben was the engineer of, and I've certainly worked on quite a bit as well on 2 dates coming up. So if you're interested in learning more about the Clery compliance tool set, those are August 14th and August 26th, and they're about a half-hour demo about that as well. I know that we have some questions. Ben, do you want to take a couple of minutes? Or
I scrolled through them. I think it'll be easier to answer some of these, and we'll send all the responses out to everyone, but I'll put together like a 1 to 2 page document and kind of get at these questions. There's some really good ones here, and I think the responses would be useful to most people. So I'll look at these a little bit closer and offer my thoughts. So
again, please feel free to submit those questions, and you will not be identified that you submitted the questions, just the question and the answer that we will be submitting. All right, and then finally, we just wanted to say thank you for attending this program. We hope you found the information provided that it's helpful to your institution. If you have not already done so, please click the survey icon at the bottom of your screen for a very short survey. This feedback helps us to identify what future programming we want to provide. And as a reminder, this program has been approved for Colorado, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, Tennessee, Texas, and Wisconsin continuing legal education credit. You will get a recording of the webinar tomorrow available for viewing and sharing. And again, remember to go to the resource link, as we do have the slides and the resource link, and we have a copy of our timely warning sample policy for you to take a look at in the resource link. So please join us for our next webinar, which will be on August 27th, and we are going to be addressing student health and safety issues on campus. So that ties in with Clery as well, so something I think a lot of people are concerned about. Again, thank you for your participation, and this concludes our webinar.